Hello and welcome back to another special edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McCaver, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Monday, September 19th. It's also a great pleasure and a privilege to be joined here in our studio by the two candidates for Lieutenant Governor from the two major parties. We're really pleased to welcome David Zuckerman and Joe Benning here to our studio to talk about the issues that are important and that we all believe that voters who want to go to the polls informed should know about. By way of introduction, Mr. Zuckerman is running for his old job. He was the Lieutenant Governor of the state from 2017 to 2021. And before that, he was a member of the Vermont State Senate. He represented Chittenden County in the State Senate from 2013 to 2017. And before that, he was a member of the House of Representatives, representing a district in Chittenden County from 1997 to 2011. When he's not involved in politics, he's an organic farmer and lives up in Heinsberg. And Mr. Zuckerman, welcome back to GNAT. State Senator Joseph Benning has been a member of the State Senate since 2010. And he served on numerous committees while there, including natural resources and energy, education, judiciary, government operations. He has also served as the Republican Party's minority leader in the state Senate. And when he's not in politics or running for office or going around the state campaigning, he is an attorney who lives in Linden, Vermont. Gentlemen, again, thank you very much for making the time and a long drive down here. Really appreciate you making the time for this conversation. And just to get us started, I thought we could hear opening statements from both of you. Mr. Zuckerman, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Andrew. Good to see you, Joe. And of course, thank you, GNAT-TV, for hosting this and others around the state who may get to see this on the public access stations. As stated, my name is David Zuckerman, and I am asking for your vote to be the next Lieutenant Governor of Vermont. As stated, I'm a father, a farmer, a small business owner, and I have had the honor of serving Vermonters for 22 years in Vermont, serving you in the legislature and as Lieutenant Governor. As many know, Vermont is not affordable for the vast majority of Vermonters. Folks have been left behind as it's become a state playground for the rich. And on top of that, Vermonters are getting hit hard by inflation, rising costs of housing, food, fuel, a lot of our basic needs. Folks can't afford childcare, can't pay their medical bills, and some folks can't even put food on the table. And I think we can do a lot better for Vermonters than where we're at. Political leaders have frankly been nibbling around the edges, but there has been a lack of urgency to fix the big issues of the day, from the climate crisis to the economic struggles, opioid overdoses, and more. And I'm running to be your next Lieutenant Governor, both to bring the experience that I have as well as the forward-thinking leadership to that office to try to tackle some of these issues. I'll be starting work with Vermonters on day one, organizing around these issues that matter. And as I have in the past, I will work to engage Vermonters, both inside the State House and outside the State House, to really help you get involved and help the issues that you have be brought into the building with more urgency than they have been. I've worked to bring people into the political process since when I was a legislator back in the late 90s. I know that when people are empowered to engage the system and bring their voices and knowledge and experiences in, that's when the legislature makes better policy. And I know we can make bigger, bolder strides in fixing these challenges, frankly, for my daughter, your children, grandchildren, and the future of Vermont. So I guess I'll just wrap up saying getting around the state, I've heard from folks all over the state firsthand, hearing about the struggles, hearing about the housing crisis, the folks that have lost loved ones to the opioid crisis. And as the next Lieutenant Governor, I look forward to working with you to bring those voices into the process and hopefully tackle these issues. Thank you.
Thanks for having us down in Bennington County, the place that has the best named county in the state of Vermont. You can read the script later to find out my name's spelled the same way. I'm not running against my progressive opponent. I'm actually running for the state of Vermont. My concerns are many, but when we hear about the term affordability crisis, that was something that Governor Scott had in mind when we were all pre-COVID. You may remember those days. Pre-COVID, we had a situation where people could not afford to live. They were moving out of state. They still are moving out of state. But for the past few years, we've been struggling through a system in the state Senate that has forced the state Senate to literally be in the most difficult of circumstances. And the people that have worked there over the past 2 years especially have developed a routine and a system that enabled all of you to be able to get inside the building without ever having to walk in and observe all the things that we have been doing. That took a lot of work. I was behind the scenes on much of that work. My intention is to try to make sure we come through this process, and I bring some institutional knowledge to the body itself. I have a working knowledge of all the players. I know that I have been working with the governor for the past 12 years on a daily basis, and one of the things I want to bring to this job is some cohesion, some harmony, if you will, between the governor's office and the lieutenant governor's office as we face a massive decrease in the amount of federal funding that will no longer be there as a result of COVID-19 money evaporating in front of us. My hope here is to work with the governor in such a way that we are addressing the affordability crisis that he has talked about from day one. And at this point in time, I think I have a better chance of doing that in this particular race than David does. And by the way, I don't mean to disparage David in any way, shape, or form. I know he has worked hard for the state. But the bottom line is when you get to those two constitutional offices at the top of the ticket, those people should be able to work in harmony, and I think I bring that to the table. I've brought a lot of legislation through the past 12 years. If you happen to be one of those 43,109 individuals who have had your criminal record expunged in the past 10 years, that was a bill that I brought. We had a very unfair situation with respect to the state Senate in that the Chittenden County delegation was a voting block of 6. I worked very hard with a couple of other legislators to make sure that that didn't happen anymore. So we have officially broken up the Chittenden 6-pack. I am hoping that brings some more balance to the state Senate. Those of us in the rural communities have been experiencing a lot of hardship through the past few years, and I don't want to exacerbate that situation with a lot of proposed legislation, especially since as a lieutenant governor, we actually can't draft legislation. It would be disingenuous for us to try to sell you the belief that we can somehow change the world from the lieutenant governor's position. We can, however, promote Vermont, and I would intend to use the office of lieutenant governor to promote Vermonters, their work ethic, their brand, their product, these green hills and silver waters. I really want to have a shot at being Vermont's chief promoter, if you will, and try to get the economy moving in a way that all folks can live and afford to live here and stay, as opposed to moving out of state under the pressures that happen when we try to punch above our weight, if you will. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, during this session, but I appreciate you taking a look at me. You can find me very easily on joebenning.com. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Benning. A couple of weeks ago, President Biden delivered a speech in Philadelphia where he expressed concerns about the state of the democracy that we have in the United States at the moment, that it was under assault and under threat. And I guess I wanted to ask you both if you thought the president was correct in that belief. Mr. Zuckerman, let me start with you. Was the president on track with that speech, or was he over the top?
I don't think he was over the top, certainly in my years of experience. For one, I'm very thankful that in Vermont we don't have the same level of challenging discourse that we see and hear from across the country. I don't think we demonize each other. Joe and I certainly have good respect and have for each other, with each other for the full time that we've served together, and I've had that experience with the vast majority of Republicans and Democrats and progressives that I've worked with over the years. But across the country, at least what we see and hear has become a level of anger and animosity. And I know some would say it's not Trump, it's others. But certainly when you're at the top and you're the leader of the country and you use the inflammatory language he has and the lock her up language and the go ahead, throw him out of here, I'll pay the legal costs kind of language, it changes the way that people view how we operate. And the way we've often operated is through reasonable discourse, and you disagree and you fight your fight. Joe knows this through the legal system as a lawyer. You put your best argument forward and you see if it wins the day. But you believe in the voting system and the outcome of the elections, and you respect that, because if you don't respect that, the rest of it falls apart. And we have very clean, very fair elections. This last election, by all accounts, was as true to the vote as any analysis and audits have done. But the level of anger, the level of racist language, the level of rhetorical language is certainly unnerving for many.
So, Andrew, your question was about Joe Biden and his speech, and I want to come right back to that to answer first. It does not help when a speech is made by someone at the top of our national discourse, making a speech that disparages the other side. That's a two-way street. I don't think with the national rhetoric the way it has been going that his speech was something that was intelligent on his behalf. It just raises the level of anger, if you will, on both sides, and then somebody feels like it's necessary to come back and respond, which is exactly what's been happening. We've been on this endless spiral of people yelling at each other and pointing fingers. I have been a trial attorney for 40 years. Much of that practice has involved mediating divorce situations. Now, I can't think of any other circumstance than a divorce where the potential for animosity is so high. But to get four people, two attorneys and a couple, into a room and try to resolve differences like major property holdings, children who are involved, everything from dogs and cats right through where your pensions are. How do you resolve all those differences in the midst of the hate that is now at the table? You have to turn to each person and say, we're here to try to resolve your life. We're here to try to move forward in such a way that if you two are yelling at each other, we are not going to resolve this. You're going to pay two lawyers a heck of a lot of money, and you'll end up being just as angry with each other on the other side of this, except that a judge will make the decision for you. And that's not in anybody's best interest. So how do you bring that back? I know that I have been critical of my own party when I hear the level of discourse that has come down the pike. I don't think it's a great opportunity for us if now the Democratic president is ratcheting up that level of animosity. So my hope is that no matter who is elected the next president, right now we all ought to be sitting back, taking a deep breath and saying, you know, for the good of our country, we have to be able to learn how to talk to each other. And I'm hoping that this race with David is actually one of those starting places.
One of the experiences I had growing up was in rural Virginia, an area that last election I think voted 85% for Trump, as well as growing up in the Boston area for much of the year, Virginia in the summers, and Boston much of the rest of the year, which voted 85% for Biden. So growing up with and knowing people who have had very different perspectives in today's world, I will say the people I knew in Virginia loved their families, had family reunions, wanted to put food on the table for their families. And what's changed in a lot of the country is the economic realities. And people are angry. You know, you're raised under the concept that you could go out there, work hard, and if you work hard, you're gonna make a decent enough living to maybe buy a home someday, a modest house, raise a family, back then on one income, now trying to do it on two and having a hard time to do it. And so I think if we work to tackle the economic struggles for people, the economic disparity in this country, that, you know, this isn't to throw shade because he's a Republican. I mean, our economy changed under Reagan with the trickle-down philosophy, and we've been cutting taxes on the highest, top of the system, and wealth has been concentrating. Now, jobs are all moved overseas. You used to be able to go work at a manufacturing plant. That's leaving all of the country, more so maybe in Vermont than some other states, but all across the country, manufacturing jobs left. Rural areas are hollowing out. Small farms are disappearing, consolidating to be big farms. So when people don't see the American dream in their future, that leads to anger and frustration. So I try to view some of the rhetoric that comes out from everyday people with the frustration and anger more from a place of trying to find where is that coming from and what can we do to resolve that, because I think that would also help temper down some of the heated level.
I get the impression, David, that you are recognizing the affordability crisis. This is frankly new language that I'm hearing from you, and I'm very impressed. The upshot is to give people a chance. We have to have people in Vermont who are leading that challenge, bringing jobs in where jobs have not appeared before. I spent this past weekend at the Caledonia County Airport for their 50th anniversary. And as it happens, I got to meet the entire staff and the CEO and his family of Beta Technologies. It's an organization that is now building electric aircraft. Phenomenal. They have hundreds of workers now that have been brought to the state. And as luck would have it, I was the highest ranking state official on the airport runway. So I just naturally took it upon myself to go and welcome him and his family to the Northeast Kingdom. And as we were talking about the kingdom and what we needed for services at our airport, as I have been at the Rutland Airport right up the road here, he started to talk about possibly expanding in our neck of the woods. That's what's going to bring high-paying jobs for people who can then afford things. But I have to say I had the best moment of my campaign. One of the planes they flew over, they probably had 10 planes, was a screaming yellow Navy trainer World War II biplane, open-seated. I'm standing there looking at it, drooling, and the CEO, Kyle Clark, says, "You want to go up?" Didn't hesitate. Next thing I know, I'm up in an open cockpit plane having the time of my life, and I have not come down from that high. The point of this is we have golden opportunities in this state. People are coming here because they love our green hills, our silver waters, the atmosphere about our friendliness. People here who have a great work ethic. I want to use this job to try to promote that more and bring this all to the table.
All right. Well, let's drill down a little bit then into some of these specific areas that would help to grow the economy and, help folks here in the state. And the number one thing I keep hearing about over and over and over down here anyway, and I'm sure it's a statewide issue as well, as housing. I know the state has put some money into, trying to develop more housing from the federal funds that became available either through ARPA or the other recovery acts. But I guess I wanted to ask you both, what should the state be doing that it's not doing at the moment to develop more, I guess, the missing middle or workforce level housing, as well as, affordable housing that would help alleviate that problem?
I'm going to start by pointing out that not a month and a half ago, the governor just broke the ribbon on a brand new housing complex up in Lamoille County. And that's because we have, over the past 2 years, taken a lot of that federal money and dedicated it to just this concern. I believe the figure was about $62 million that was set aside. That money is in the pipeline for the most part. We still don't have projects that are anywhere near shovel ready. In fact, the contractors of this state are pulling their hair out trying to find laborers to be able to work. Then in turn, when they get those laborers, the other part of that equation is you have to have the materials in order to build those houses. The housing crunch, if you will, is caused by a lack of materials that are available to those contractors. They are on back order a long ways, and that's one of the problems the state is facing right now. As chair of the Senate Institutions Committee, it's become apparent to me we have a lot of work to do. We have the money set aside to do it, but getting from here to there has become problematic for the reasons I've just described. There's one other area that has been a constant complaint for every contractor that I've ever talked with. The Act 250 process has been a burden, if you will, in their design and implementation plans. I am not disparaging Act 250 because I think it's done a very good job of keeping these green hills and silver waters intact. But there are two things that could be done in order to try to advance the housing crisis, at least address the housing crisis. First, on the front end, if we were to have a series of licensed planners or architects in the front end who would be able to go to or have a developer come to them and say, I've got a project, this is what it is, that licensed individual would be able to look it over and say, I think that meets Act 250 criteria. At that moment in time, if they have given their licensed approval to that project, the burden should then shift to anybody who is on the defensive side of that saying it shouldn't happen. The other part of that is at the back end where when somebody comes and tries to develop a project, an appeal is put forward. The appellate process has been incredibly lengthy. We have to put a stop to the length of time that happens in order for us to be able to present to contractors in such a way to say, here is what the first day is going to look like for you. You can look down the road and know that you're going to have an answer as to whether or not you can build this project within a given period of time. That, I think, would go a long way for contractors to say, you know what, I'm going to take a better look at Vermont rather than throwing up my hands and walking away.
Mr. Zuckerman?
Well, I appreciate a lot of Joe's response, although we would differ on a few things. First, I'm going to start back a little ways. We had a housing crisis before COVID. We've had a housing crisis for quite some time. We have underfunded, and yes, there was one bond a number of years ago under this administration to build more affordable housing, but that was, I think, in the first term, and then we haven't seen much of that since. And this is where we probably have a fundamental difference between the role of our state government and government in general, is that if you're about small government and free market economy, that's what we're living with right now. There are wealthy folks, or folks at least who have enough money to move, coming to Vermont, buying up homes, as we know, with cash offers that are outmatching most Vermonters' ability to pay for those houses. That's happening in every corner of the state, including down here in the southern part, quite a bit, with folks from Massachusetts and New York. And so this sort of belief in pure supply, demand, laissez-faire capitalist economy has landed us where we are. And we have underfunded building affordable housing for decades. And that's why we're where we're at. We certainly had the good fortune, through the bad fortune of COVID, to receive a disproportionate amount of money. Thank you, Senator Leahy and our federal delegation. Without that, I don't know that we would have this money in the pipeline. I certainly don't think this administration or my colleague would have voted to raise funds from those who could most afford it to build affordable housing. When it's free money, as it's often said it isn't, by folks from Joe's side of the aisle, they're happy to give it out and build this housing. But I think we need to continue looking at how to find resources to build more affordable housing. This money will run out and we will still have a housing crisis. So when you look at some of the situations, we have, I believe, the most, if not second most, second homes in the country per capita. Maybe with our property tax system, it's time to look at them as a third category, because we don't, they're in with business, industrial, and commercial. And we don't want to raise that to harm the potential business development that I think Joe was alluding to earlier. On the other hand, these houses sit empty most of the year. We also have had a huge conversion of long-term rentals, workers, younger people living in housing as they're figuring out where they're going and what they're going to do over the next few years if they want to settle in one place or another, being converted to short-term rentals. There's money to be made for Vermonters in that regard, but at the same time, it's driving out the ability for workers to be here. Many people actually I know are leaving the state because they can't find housing. I met someone at the Champlain Valley Fair, speaking of fairs, a couple who were both working full-time, middle-income Vermonters. They had been renting an apartment for $1,600 a month, and they said that the duplex was sold. They were told they had to move out. They didn't have a copy of their lease and were told it was actually month-to-month at that point, which unfortunately we don't really know the details there. But they were moved out at the sale of the house, and the new apartment, that apartment was then rented for $3,000 a month. You know, Vermonters can't afford $36,000 a year as a couple for housing, but someone can. And so these are the issues we're facing. And if we don't address it, then we're going to really be continuing to see this shift of whether Vermonters can stay here. And with Act 250, you know, I would say one of the reasons we love Vermont, the Green Hills and Silver Waters, is because we haven't covered them in houses. We haven't polluted those rivers. In fact, we had, and we've been working to clean them. And so these are some of the parts of Act 250 that are critically important. They're part of what's kept Vermont the incredible state that we love to have. So I would say the state could invest in our town and village centers, whether it's infrastructure around sewer or water, to allow for more development in those areas so that we could redevelop our town centers, maybe have large enough populations that there could be a town store, rekindled in towns that they've disappeared in, and have that local community that many people in Vermont grew up feeling that have started to hollow out, much like that rural part of Virginia I was talking about earlier.
If I could respond, I just took a tour of downtown Rutland, which has benefited from being a TIF district, tax increment financing. They have taken the money and they have invested it in their downtown. That city has transformed itself and is really looking like an exciting place to come live and work. They are developing housing along with the business storefronts that would be necessary for people to work in while they're living in downtown, which is a tremendous opportunity. But I think I'm hearing a difference between us, David, that you're intending to use government to either build houses or take control of rental properties. I know in our
I didn't say anything about take control, so don't put words in my mouth.
What I heard the last time we had a debate was that you were, I guess, chastising my party for not having a registry of rental properties. And I think a fundamental difference between us is I have looked to the free market economy to try to correct things. And I'm nervous about government taking a look at people's property and deciding government's going to determine how they would be able to use their own property. That is a fundamental difference between us. But the housing crisis was there prior to COVID. We wisely used the federal money that came down the pike for infrastructure as opposed to creating new programs. And at this point in time, there is a whole lot of money still out there waiting for housing projects to be built. So I'm optimistic that we have taken the right steps. We have to give it a little time for laborers to show up at the contractors' offices and for materials to come down the pike so that they can work with them. But if you go down through downtown Rutland right now, you're going to see several hundred people who are working all around that basic downtown, creating a place that I think Vermonters can be proud of.
If I may, because there was a few comments there that were a realignment of what I've said.
Okay.
And Joe is good at that. That's what you do in the courtroom, to sow doubt in the jury. Joe, and you've done that for 40 years, and I assume you're pretty good at it. A rental registry is not telling anybody whether they can rent their apartment or not. It's not telling them how they can use their property. It's simply to actually help protect renters and have information so we know how many rental units are there. We would now know the conversion rate of long-term and short-term rentals. So we could actually have those statistics. I believe in a prior debate, you said, well, before I make a decision, we need more information. A rental registry is information. It's not telling people what to do with their property.
What would you want to have done with that registration?
Well, you would know what the housing stock is. You would know more about, in Burlington, they inspect properties so that the housing can then be made sure it's safe for renters. There are opportunities that the state funds through lead programs and others to actually help rental properties and rental owners remedy and remediate the lead in their houses. There are opportunities to create support for renters and or landlords to make those properties healthier. Certainly we have some properties that landlords keep in fairly poor repair. There are others that are kept in better. And these are conversations to be had, but it isn't about the way you put it, people controlling what you do with your property. You get to rent your property or own your property or sell your property in Burlington just like anywhere else.
Well, I can see why housing is a #1 issue in the state here. And another big issue I keep hearing a lot about is childcare, or rather the lack of it. Folks who work in that industry are notoriously underpaid, at least as I understand it. There aren't many facilities available, and that really puts a strain on working families. I guess I'm just wondering if either of you have any thoughts on how we might amplify the amount of child care that's available to younger Vermonters, younger families, and how we might, fix that.
Well, fixing it is not going to be easy. I think everyone knows we're talking about tens, if not even more than tens of millions of dollars. Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. That might be needed in public investment to create the opportunity for more people to enter the workforce, because right now childcare is more expensive than most of the jobs people can get. And so many individuals, parents, are choosing, well, wait a minute, for me to send 2 or 3 kids into childcare costs me more than I can make, so I'll stay home. but I can't stay home because the cost of housing just went up 40% this last year. So housing and childcare are probably two of the biggest binds that exist. Earlier, my friendly opponent across the way mentioned that affordability being new from me. I don't know that that's actually true. I've talked about reducing the cost of healthcare for decades through a universal healthcare system, for instance, and people are paying through the nose for healthcare as well. So I would say that's the third leg of the expense, large expense out of people's households. I know that with Let's Grow Kids and others, one of the efforts, early child care, is to make it so that no family pays more than 10% of their income in child care. Whether that's through state support or some other way, if that is what it takes to help people survive affordability in Vermont and then also add people to the workforce, which will be a positive spiral of economic activity, that's something I think we should look at. I think we need to look at a public investment, and we need to look at what I referenced in my opening or soon thereafter around Reaganomics and trickle down and free market capitalism, where that 50 years has benefited a relative few, and most people are harder off now than they were 50 years ago. I think the wealthiest can pay more. I've never shied away from saying that, and if we want to go with the way it's rolling right now, I think we're going to see more families struggling to either send their kids out of the house to childcare or pay their rent, or they're going to leave.
Mr. Benning.
So presently we have 640,000 people in this state, and we have just spent $8.2 billion as the last budget has come down, and we're about to lose, I believe, somewhere in the vicinity of $2 billion from the revenue stream that has come to us from the federal government. We as lieutenant governor candidates cannot look you in the eye and say, we can solve this problem with piece of legislation X, because we cannot draft legislation. We can, however, try to promote ideas. One of the pet peeves I've had in my legislative career was when we were dealing with a bill that essentially said we're going to require a licensed educator in every daycare facility. It was well-intentioned. It was something that was designed to help improve the lot of kids who were in those daycares. But nobody sat back and thought about the potential consequences of what that actually meant if you imposed that requirement on daycare facilities around the state. What resulted, according to the Joint Fiscal Office, was the loss of 40% of the daycare facilities in Essex counties and 7% statewide. That does not help us. That was a government intrusion that actually worked in the opposite direction of what we were trying to accomplish. Now, earlier I talked about an entity called Beta Technologies that's brought a whole lot of jobs and a whole lot of ideas to new technology in this state. They have, as part of their intention, daycare facilities that they would like to incorporate to benefit their workers. That's the kind of thing that we need to be pumping out, please, if you will, across the globe to bring people here who are able to do that and build good jobs, build facilities that can bring in daycare workers, bring in good daycares, and even if you want to go that far, bring in licensed educators. But having government take control of that and having that happen has cost us dearly in the number of spaces we've had available for daycare. And I would, if I had it in my power to draft legislation, would work to repeal that very piece of legislation that hurt us so much.
I don't know if you did introduce that bill as a senator to repeal it or not. You had that opportunity, but I don't believe you did. The bottom line is most of our developmental years, 0 to 5, is in that preschool, childcare, daycare years. That's where we become the well-rounded citizens that even maybe some of the discussion we started on with the Biden conversation and the issue of our democracy comes from. How do we have discourse? How do we treat each other in our differences? I think it's important that I think we were on that committee together that maybe even passed that bill. I'm not quite sure if that was before we were on education, but I think we were there together. I do think in a civilized, developed society, you work to improve these situations. Sure, Beta will do that. Maybe medical centers have, the larger businesses can do that. As a farm owner who employs, 4 to 8 people a year, there's no way we can afford a child center within our business. And that's the backbone of Vermont, is small businesses. So I certainly want to continue to attract the Betas and others. At the farmers market, every week now I am meeting tens and dozens of people who have moved to Vermont. These are people with resources, these are entrepreneurs, these are people who are moving to Vermont for a wide range of reasons. Since we're often touted as a high-tax state, clearly that hasn't been an impediment to them. They want to have the quality of life that livable communities, that the hillsides and the mountains and the rivers and the lakes to recreate on. But childcare and housing are part of that equation. And I think those folks with those resources are looking at the world anew between the pandemic, between the climate crisis, and everything else, recognizing that you can't take it with you when you go. And they're ready to be members of the community to make sure everybody's boats are lifted with things like childcare.
Let's move on to another major topic of conversation around the state, and that's climate change. Last session, the legislature came close to passing a clean heat standard. It didn't make it through the finish line, as the saying goes. And there's been an awful lot of discussion about things like fortifying the electric grid, building more renewable energy, solar, wind, whatever. Wondered if we could maybe start it by talking about what's been referred to often as NIMBYism, not in my backyard. There have been attempts to build renewable energy projects in this area, which have foundered because the neighbors who were within eyesight of it didn't like it. Or how do we get around that? Because it's a small state, and yes, there are certain places like former landfills, for instance, where there aren't too many neighbors within the view shed, as I believe the expression goes. But yeah, the same people that object to it being across the road from them are perfectly happy to say, well, yeah, but I'm in favor of it, but just don't build it here.
We have wrestled with these questions for a very long time, but we're talking about renewable energy right now. I have fought very hard against a certain renewable energy tool, not because I am a climate change denier, not because I don't believe we need to be moving in a direction that takes us off of fossil fuels, but because I know the small size of this state and the things that we have here that are important, like our mountaintop ridge lines, which are our best carbon sinks, they are our best wildlife corridors. You don't dynamite miles and miles of ridge line in order to address a problem that we know won't be solved by what you're putting on top of it. It may make a few people very rich who have that ability. And I know that one of David's contributors is somebody who has clearly stated he would prefer to have wind towers on 211 miles worth of ridge lines in the state of Vermont. I fought very hard in the 1980s to keep acid rain from floating out of the Midwest coal plants and defoliating our mountaintop ridgelines. That effort should not go for naught because somebody has this idea and everybody gets enamored with that idea, and then suddenly we're looking at a massive transformation of what Vermont and its image are all about. So we have to wrestle with a couple of things in the NIMBYism question. Is it something that is going to be dominating the hillside and you're going to have blades throwing shadows onto homes that are nearby? That's a legitimate concern for anybody who's going to be asked this question. Or is it something like solar power that can actually blend into the landscape? You have to make decisions about how you want to move forward, but you've got to make those decisions using the right tools. And if you have the right tools, NIMBYism, I think, becomes less and less a concern. You can talk about the methane digester up in Coventry, at the landfill in Coventry. I have not heard people get upset about the methane being burned off there. What I am hearing a lot of is the leachate that's coming out from underneath it, and it's infecting the waterways. So the idea is you have to make intelligent decisions about the tools that you want to use in addressing the problem. And I think that if you're decisions are intelligent, they can be sold a lot easier to the people who would normally be claiming, not in my backyard.
Well, a lot to unpack there. First of all, the donation comment, I just want to cover that. I've supported renewable energy long before anybody donated to me about this, because the whole time I've been in the legislature, I've been interested in the climate and our environment. I was an environmental studies major at UVM. It's actually what got me into agriculture and organic farming and building the soil through carbon sequestration, which is now a new term called regenerative ag. Well, some of us have been working on that and doing that for 20 or 30 years, and others longer before me, using plants to pull carbon out of the air and put it back in the soil. It's probably our best tool we have for fighting the climate crisis all across the country. But with respect to renewable energy, we in Vermont are very good at saying we want a green planet, we want green energy, but we don't want it in our backyard. We want to be able to turn on the lights, watch the TV, turn on the heat in our homes, as long as we don't see or feel the effects that are happening to somebody somewhere because of that. The reality is, if we are going to live using the amount of energy we are using, then I think it's just as responsible that we live with the production of that energy. Maybe someone is talking about 200 miles of ridgeline. I don't know anybody who's talking about that realistically, so you can throw it out there as a scary number, but
211.
no one's talking about that realistically. You know, there are 4 turbines on Georgia Mountain that produce 10% of the power for Burlington. You know, half of Burlington's power output is owned by the Burlington Electric wood chip plant. You know, there's a combination of wind, solar, and other renewable energy that we could do a lot for Vermont with. And the impediments, the laws that have been changed, the votes that have been cast, including by my colleague, to put up impediments to siting solar power, to siting wind, is what's put a stop to a lot of that. And I think most Vermonters that I know, when they look at these facilities, say, oh, my daughter has a future. I will tell you, the anxiety amongst youth, at least around me, around their future, from the democracy conversation to the climate conversation to the racial injustice issues, is through the roof. And ultimately, if we don't address the climate crisis, and I know the next sentences out are, if Vermont does everything we can, it's not going to change a lick of what happens around the world. Well, we don't have billboards, and I think a lot of people love that. We did that without anybody else, you know, changing the world. We passed marriage equality, which I fought hard for in 2000 and 2008. And our country has moved, you know, in that direction since, and hopefully will stay there depending on the Supreme Court. So Vermont can lead the way at figuring out ways to do it responsibly, but also take responsibility for our own impact. If you look at people's fuel bills today, the more we weatherize homes, which has been underfunded year after year in the proposed budgets from this administration, and unfortunately with the resources that the legislature allocated, we have underfunded weatherizing homes to save Vermonters money and reduce our energy consumption. So there's a range of things we could invest in, as well as policies we could change to start to really tackle the climate crisis and give some folks hope for our future.
If I could just respond, I think you're going to have to search long and hard before you find I have voted on anything that was an impediment to solar power. I certainly have been an outspoken critic of wind power in this state.
Fair.
But every generating source in this state devotes its energy to ISO New England, which is a collection point, if you will, on the grid. And ISO New England then in turn sends out power to the states where it's needed most. That's a system that we have been contributing into. The point of that is electricity is a commodity. It's a power that can be produced anywhere in the world and brought to Vermont. One of the things we have benefited from is Hydro-Quebec. I know there is an argument that says the indigenous people were unfortunately removed from their homes. That is a past fact that I cannot deal with, but there is a system up there that is generating electricity, and we have been taking advantage of it, and there's no reason that we can't continue to take advantage of it. The other part of this is there are new technologies coming on board. There's a guy named James Perkins in Bradford who is trying to develop what he calls microhydro, a system about as big as a bread box that would sit in a brook and literally generate enough power for at least one home. Those are the kinds of technologies that we, in this position of lieutenant governor, should be scouring the countryside for, trying to come up with ideas that don't leave us in a NIMBY situation or have this battle about which is better and what we have done in the past or should have done in the past. We have to get beyond that and move towards progress, if you will.
Well, and I apologize, I've got to say one more word here, which is, I've heard Joe talk a lot about ISO New England for a while, and I was on the Burlington Electric Light Commission back in the 90s. And with some of my science background as a chemistry minor and some of the physics I learned, the description of electrons and energy is a little bit simplified for the purpose of an argument. Yes, electrons can travel anywhere. They do lose power, so the farther it travels, the more waste there is in the system. So I think discussing energy could travel anywhere in the world. Sure, we have oil moving all around the world, we have natural gas moving all around the world. It takes energy to move it, and you also lose energy if you do it through wires and resistance. So the more localized your energy production, including microhydro, which is great, is something to consider. I don't think we should just export the production out of our own NIMBY philosophies, but in fact could do more, not only with the microhydro, but with solar, as I think you've made clear we agree on, and potentially wind, which maybe we disagree on that. I don't think anybody wants 200 miles of ridge lines covered, but I look at those turbines, I look at solar panels, and I see, as I said, a future where farmers are going to be able to continue to grow food, where our maple season isn't going to disappear, where our ski season isn't going to be gone in 50 years, which could well happen under many of the projections.
I have a smile on my face, David, because I distinctly recall a debate we were having on the Senate floor about siting wind turbines in the Northeast Kingdom to bring power to the most populated parts of the state. And one of the arguments against it was you don't have the infrastructure to get from point A to point B, and for every mile of infrastructure that you have to build, you are correspondingly losing a piece of energy along the way.
This is another conversation we could probably go on for a long time, but I think we have time. We have time for one more question here, and that's about law enforcement. There's been an awful lot of talk in the last couple of years about, well, defunding the police or not defunding the police, restructuring the police. Should there be more social workers embedded in police departments? Do we need more police officers, or why do we have so many police officers retiring and vacancies in police departments from the state police on down to local police departments? So I guess I just wanted to ask you both, what do you think should happen? Should we restructure the police forces? Should we just leave it the way it is? Mr. Benning, we'll start with you.
We made I shouldn't say we, because there was not universal opinion on this, but the idea of defunding the police, in my eyes, was a terrible mistake. It did several different things. Number one, it decreased the amount of personnel necessary to be on the beat. Those people are on the beat to protect us, and when you start to take away from those people, you end up in a situation where you're literally putting your own safety on the line, and you have to think about that. In defunding the police, the attitude was, we've seen several instances of really egregious conduct by police officers. I understand the frustration of people, but you've got to listen to the evidence that's out in front of you, not get wrapped up on what you see on Facebook or television. The upshot is that unfortunately, I look at Burlington as the classic example. There is no question in my eyes that the crime rate in Burlington is going up. I think everybody is on agreement with that. We sat in Judiciary Committee and have taken hours of testimony on the subject of qualified immunity. What would it mean to remove that from prospective police officers? How does that impact every agency around the state that's trying to recruit new recruits? And the evidence was overwhelming before us that if you were trying to move in that direction of both defunding the police and getting rid of qualified immunity, you were having a serious impact on the ability of those law enforcement agencies to gather people who might look at that as a career. So in my eyes, we made two mistakes this past couple of years in the legislature. And listening to people who were emotionally upset about George Floyd, rightfully so, but that led the effort to say, let's defund the police. And I don't think Burlington has improved as a result of that effort. The other thing that has happened over the past 10 years that I have been there is law enforcement agencies have actually done a pretty good job responding to problems that we have presented to them. And I'm going to give a for instance from my days when I was chair of the Human Rights Commission. At that time, there was a police chief in South Burlington named Mike Sherling. Mike Sherling was brought to task, if you will, by the Human Rights Commission. It was alleged that his agency was stopping people of color at a rate that was much different than what we would normally expect. Well, as it turns out, there was nobody collecting any data at the time. And one of the efforts that we put out for him, and he actually responded to, was to start collecting that data. It's a simple thing to do. You are trained on how to maintain the data. You're trained on how to interpret the data, and you can make corresponding educational programs within the agencies themselves in trying to make sure things don't happen that shouldn't be happening. But I have to give credit to our law enforcement agencies because by and large, they have heard the message about concerns. They have done their best to react to it, but they're at the same time trying to deal with people screaming on the streets, defund the police, and we're going to get rid of qualified immunity, which should scare anybody in keeping them from joining a law enforcement agency. So those are the kinds of attitudes, at least from my perspective as Lieutenant Governor, I would want to change that attitude.
Mr. Zuckerman.
Well, a few things. One, I've mentioned to many of my friends and folks who I know are on some of the discussions around defund the police that I think the terminology is poor terminology. There has, I think that conversation has primarily only happened in one city, and yet all across the country, law enforcement is seeing a decline. I think it's far more around the social media and Facebook that Joe mentioned, which I actually don't fault because what's happening there is with the advent of these little cameras, these computers with a camera, and happen to also be phones, a lot is being caught on film that before these was happening, but nobody believed the folks who were saying it was happening. And now, and I am greatly appreciative of a lot of law enforcement who are starting to really look at this happening and saying we have to do better. You know, right now, people are struggling to put, again, food on the tables or a house over their head, roof over their head. And not only might it be qualified immunity, but it's simply a very risky job. And I think people, regardless of their political persuasion, need to recognize that law enforcement, every time they pull a car over, every time they go to a domestic, every time they go to any call that they're called to, there is greater risk involved than most other jobs. Although, frankly, farming, people get hurt just as much, if not more, but maybe not in quite as violent a way. But we have to look at what we're paying folks. We need to look at augmenting law enforcement, as Governor Scott started to do back in the day in Franklin County, I think was the first, to put mental health workers in with law enforcement. Our law enforcement is not trained for all of the issues that they're facing today. And we need to give them more tools and more people with more experience with different tools to address public safety, not just law enforcement. And that is a different lens, but with a similar goal of outcome, I think, that my colleague across the table has.
Well, as my phone reminded me, we're just about out of time, but I wanted to give both of you an opportunity to maybe make a closing statement, 1 minute or so or less. That's about what we got.
So I'm running for the office of Lieutenant Governor primarily because I don't want to use the position as a revolving door. We're coming out of COVID in a situation where we had somebody take that Lieutenant Governor's position and decide it was a way to climb up the ladder. I don't want to disparage my progressive colleague in any way, shape, or form, but I think it's pretty safe to say he has no intention of staying in the job, and he is looking to rise up the political rung. That's a natural progression, and I wish him well in that, but my sole concern is the status of the state Senate. I really believe we have some need for institutional knowledge. I really believe we need to have somebody who is able to work in sync and in harmony with the governor. I've worked with Phil Scott for 12 years now. I've worked with his campaign team as well as his administrative team. I've advanced causes that he has. And for instance, if you travel along Route 15 right now, along that 93-mile former rail corridor, now known as the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, you're going to see a couple of dozen projects going on to refurbish the bridges and their abutments across that trail mechanism. We have a golden opportunity through that Lamoille Valley Rail Trail to increase the economic activity along it. And there are many businesses now popping up along it, and that was a wise expenditure of our monies. I want to be able to work with Phil Scott as he continues making this state a more affordable place to live. The problem with David is that he has had a rather contentious situation, and I'm not going to say it was necessarily his fault, but the bottom line is he would not be able to be as in sync with the governor as I believe I can. And at this point, I believe I make the best of two choices. Again, you can find me at joebenning.com. Thanks everybody for turning out and watching us today.
Thank you again for having us. I appreciate the opportunity. I have a very long track record of working with people all across the state to advance issues, both as a legislator and as lieutenant governor, to really bring the issues that Vermonters have expressed to me all across the state are important to them, whether it's climate, housing, cannabis reform, raising minimum wage, marriage equality. These don't happen because of one legislator, such as myself, talking about them a lot, or a particular governor promoting them. They happen because people across the state collectively use their voices to influence the political process in Montpelier. As lieutenant governor, which I was asked by many people to run for last fall and into the winter, I had not intended to run until a number of people said, David, we want you in that office. We want you and your voice back there advocating for these issues, helping bring more people in so that these very prescient issues, from climate to housing, and you name it, now of course reproductive liberty is also on the ballot. They asked me to run because of that experience, because of that advocacy. And I look forward to working with people all over the state, including the governor. Happy to work with the governor on these issues. But to me, it's about working with Vermonters all across the state to make these issues front and center as the legislature comes to be. I was serving as lieutenant governor when COVID started, was instrumental in the transition to the systems that Joe was mentioning earlier. And I look forward to it being the benefits from that system, but honestly, the benefits from in-person work again, from real connection with people all over the state and in that building. And of course, would welcome you reaching out to me through my campaign at Zuckerman, F-O-R-V-T, ZuckermanForVermont.com. You can also do info@ to send a message with any question you've got. We'd be happy to get back to you. But I'm proud of the work I've done for Vermont and look forward to working for you again.
Well, okay, we'll have to leave it there for today. Unfortunately, there are about 5 or 6 other questions that were on the table, but I thought it was very interesting to hear from you both in an in-depth kind of way.
Good conversation.
It was very illuminating, and we hope that you found the show as interesting and as informative as I did, and we'll tune in again for other debates and discussions we'll be having with candidates who are running for some of the local offices around our area as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again the next time.